As we continue our in-depth discussion of layers, I now want to move on and talk about layer grouping. Now, layer grouping allows you to take a bunch of layers and kind of put them together inside their own little subfolder. It's a very useful way to organize layers in your scene. You can have nested groups, so you can have groups within groups, and we'll explore a bit of that. Now, if you'd like to follow along, you can just create any document you like and create a stack of layers. As a special treat to our 3D Buzz member sponsor subscribers, I have put this file up for download in the member sponsor video file download section. So if you want to follow along with exactly the same file as a member sponsor, you can do that. Even without it, though, you should be able to follow along just fine. First, let's take a quick look at what it is we're actually looking at. So every single part of this drawing has been broken down into its own separate layer. So as I start systematically going from top to bottom and turn them off, we have the blade shine, the blade side, the blade edge, and eventually the whole sword disappears. We have the cross guard sections. We have the sections of our sketch, which I'll turn those off. We have the eye area, we have shadows and highlights on our armor, we have our sash and bandana colors, we have our armor accents, we have the base uniform color, we have a skin section, pupils, and irises. Now, if I was to show you how this was all put together, we started off with a simple sketch for proportion and layout. Now, that's really, really faint, but that's just because the brushstrokes themselves were pretty faint. If I copy this off a few times just for the fun of it, it becomes a lot easier to see what was going on. Now, you might be wondering how I just did that, and it's a set of hotkeys that I haven't really discussed up to this point. If you hold down the Alt key, and you drag a layer up to another entry in the list, that will duplicate a layer. So if I duplicate that off a few times, the transparent nature of those pixels starts to stack up, and you can see that drawing a whole lot more clearly. Now, here's where I'm really going to blow your mind. I'll grab all three of these layers together by holding down the Shift key and clicking on the bottom one down. So you see we have proportions and layout. I have 3 copies of that. I'm going to hit Control E. And what that's going to do is merge those layers down. And I'll talk a little bit more about merging layers and collapsing layers a bit later on. I just wanted to show that off so you can see what my initial drawing kind of looked like. So once we had the initial proportions down, and this guy's really kind of alarming proportions, we created a sketch, and I just created that by tracing over the original image. Also very, very faint. Once I had that, I created a much cleaner version of the sketch, which you can see here. Now, the reason these are kind of halfway through the stack is I was actually using the cleaner sketch as sort of an outline for the rest of the drawing. So we started off with a base uniform color, which I just sketched into dark gray, and then an armor accents area, so I just painted that on top. So you can see the armor accents are just kind of on their own layer. We have a sash and bandana layer, which just recolors those. We have highlights for the armor, and we have shadows for the armor, both drawn on their own individual layers, so I can turn those on, turn those off as I like. We have some shading for the eye area. I don't need the other 2 sketches. And then if I scroll down here, we have the irises, we have the pupils, and we have the skin. And then we have our crossguard layers. We have the initial edge for the blade. We have the side of the blade, which makes it look like we've got a nice little bevel right there. And that the blade edge does have a couple of layer styles on it, being a stroke, which gives it an outline, and a gradient overlay, which just kind of darkens it as it comes toward us. It just makes things look a little more visually interesting. Gives it a little pop, if you will. So there's back to the blade side, and then we have a little streak of shininess on the blade just for entertainment value. So there's a quick rundown of all the layers we have. The problem is, however, that this is a really long list of layers, and it could get confusing really quick as to exactly where you want to look. You don't want to necessarily scroll through all of this just to figure out what you want to change. So we're going to take just a moment and organize this stack of layers into some groups. So first off, let's start off with just the uniform itself. So we have the base uniform color, we have the armor accents, and I'll go ahead and include the sash and bandana. And I'm going to drag these down into the group icon. Now, we saw this earlier when we were going over the user interface for the layers panel. We have a little group icon we can drag that down into, and those automatically get put into a group. If I undo that, we can go under Layer, choose New, and choose either Group, which will just create an empty group, or we can choose Group from Layers, and that'll give us the opportunity to go ahead and name the group first. So we'll call this Armor Colors, and press Enter. Now, underneath armor colors, we have the sash and bandana, we have the armor accents, and the base uniform color. I can turn all of those on or off at will, which is extremely handy. Now notice that the skin, the pupils, and the irises are all stacked up underneath the armor colors. Let's go ahead and put these into their own little group. So I'll grab the skin, the pupils, and the irises. This time I will drag these into their own group. And we'll call this the exposed face group. And let me go ahead and put a space in between here. I often don't because I work with Maya so much, but we can put spaces in here to make stuff easier to read. Now the reason all of that is underneath the armor is if I put it on top, you can see how messy this really was. I was taking advantage of the fact that I was painting underneath a layer to keep everything looking nice. So sometimes the order in which your layers are stacked is going to be extremely important in getting the right visual outcome. Now here we have the shading for the eye area, and we have the shadows and highlights for the armor. Let's go ahead and put all of that into its own group, which we'll simply call shading. We can turn that on and off. And you see we go from just base colors to having a little bit of depth in the image, which is very, very cool. Now we have our proportions and layout, we have our original sketch, and then we have our cleaner sketch. Even though we only are going to have the cleaner sketch visible, let's say for some reason we want to hold on to the original sketch for, I don't know, maybe just for posterity. Let's grab all three of these together, and we'll put these into a group that we'll simply call sketches. Actually, let's do this. Let's call it sketches and lines. Now, we have the crossguard color and the crossguard highlight. We have the blade edge, the blade side, and the blade shine. I'm going to move the crossguard highlight up here right underneath blade shine. It won't make any difference, and we can see where that is. If you look right here at the crossguard, you can see me blinking that on and off. So let's take the blade side, the blade edge, and the crossguard color. We'll select all of those and put those into a group that we'll call sword color. We'll take shine and crossguard highlight, put these into a group, which we will call sword shading. So now we have a nice organizational system for anything we might want to change. If we need to change something about the armor colors, we can jump down right underneath armor colors, and we have easy access to the armor accents and to the base uniform color as well. Now we can go even further with this. As I mentioned earlier, we can have groups within groups. For example, if we open up the sketches and lines group, we only have one of these showing, and then the others are just the original sketch and the proportions and layout, which we're not even really using anymore. So let's grab the pair of these. We'll go ahead and make them visible, but then we're going to put them into their own little subgroup, which we'll call initial sketch work. I'll change the cleaner sketch just to cleaner lines. And now underneath sketches and lines, we have a little bit of a subgroup that we can turn on and off all as one. We could also grab the whole thing and pull it aside if we need to do a side-by-side comparison. So we'll go ahead and turn that off. So if we take a look under... Actually, I guess that's probably about all I would really want to nest underneath here. I mean, we could continue nesting. For instance, we could grab sword shading and sword color, put those into a group, which we could simply call, not shord, I don't know, wow, that's horrible typing, sword. We could take the rest of the body and put this under its own little group called body. And then we could grab both of these and put them into a group, which we simply call ninja. The cool thing about doing this is that at any point we can just grab the master group, the ninja group, and we can move that around, put it anywhere we like. If we step it open, we have the ability to take the sword away, so we can just turn the sword on and off. And then, of course, we have the individual control over any part within it. I do want to mention that if you really like nesting groups, you can have up to 10 layers in the hierarchy, and that is it. So what do I mean when I say that? Let me go ahead and show you. If I was to create a brand new group, notice it's called Group 1 by default, and then we can drag that into a group. So you'll notice we now have a nested group. We have Group 2 with Group 1 underneath. We'll grab Group 2 and put that into a group. Group 3, and you see I'm just making this hierarchy. There's no real reason you want to do this. I'm just doing it to demonstrate something. Group 8, Group 9, group 10, and then as soon as I try to do that one more time, you'll notice the new group button grays out. You can only have a hierarchy that's 10 units deep. Now, at any different level, at any tier of this hierarchy, we can create multiple groups within. It's just the depth can only be 10 units deep. So just something for you to keep in mind. I'm going to collapse all that down and throw it all away because we really don't need it. And I hope that makes the idea of grouping much easier for you to swallow. I do want to mention this, however. Each group can have its own blend mode. Now, if you've been watching these videos sequentially, we have not yet discussed blend modes specifically, aside from the fact that they do control how your layer is going to blend with whatever's underneath it. So just kind of for the fun of it, let's go over to, let's select our background. We'll go to File, Place, and I'll place in our desert picture. And Photoshop is thinking, oh, I might have crashed Photoshop. I hope I didn't crash Photoshop, but it's entirely possible that I did. Oh, there it goes. So Photoshop is back. I did have to hit escape, so whatever it was trying to do, it kind of it went a little nuts on me. So here's what I'm going to do. Let's try that just one more time. Actually, I'm going to do it a different way, just in case my computer's being a little silly. I'm going to open the desert image. I'm going to break it off, so it's no longer going to be tabbed. I'm just going to float it as its own thing. Then I'll get the Move tool out, which I can select at the top of the Tools panel or by hitting the V key. And I'll just drag this out like so. So there's our desert image now sitting on top of our Ninja. I'm going to hit Control T. Now this is something we haven't yet discussed. I'm just doing it because it's fancy, okay? This allows us to transform the image, and I'm just going to scale this out by dragging the corners until it fills in our entire canvas and press Enter. Next, I'm going to drag the layer for this little desert image underneath the group for our Ninja. Be really careful about doing this though. As you're dragging it down in the layer panel, if you see a little box highlighting all the way around the Ninja group, that means you're putting this inside the Ninja group. You don't want to do that, really. We want to put this underneath the group, just over the background layer. So I'll drag it up here to the top, and this time, now when I drag it down, I want to see a nice thick line in between the Ninja group and the background layer. And there we go. So now the Ninja is completely separated. This also brings out an interesting point that his eyes were apparently never colored. Let's take a moment and fix that. So I'll jump into Ninja. We'll jump under the body. We have the colors and we have the exposed face. So let's grab the exposed face. We have skin, pupils, irises. Let's go right underneath the irises and we'll create a brand new layer. So actually what I'll do is I'll select exposed face, click new layer, and we'll call this eye whites. I'm going to drag this underneath the irises. It'll be important for it to be underneath. As a matter of fact, let me do it the wrong way first and you'll see why. Now I'll get my brush tool out. So I'll hit the B key to open that up. I'll set my foreground color to white. So I'll click on my color swatch, drag this up here to the corner to white. And let me shrink my brush down by hitting the left bracket key a few times. And I'm just going to paint a stroke of white and paint a stroke of white. And it looks terrible. But since I didn't want to meticulously go through and paint each individual pixel, I just made these great big fat strokes of white. I could in fact do like a visor across both of his eyes. Now if I just take the eye whites layer and drag it underneath irises, it fits right there in the background very easily. And I'm going to get my eraser and clean up this one little corner right over here because it went just a little bit far. There we go. So now the whites of his eyes are working, and you see how our arrangement, our organization using groups allowed us to quickly get to right where we needed to get in order to patch that up. So let's zoom back out, and we could take our Ninja here, and we can put him down here in the corner of our image. We can hide him. We have all kinds of control over him because he is broken up into all of these different groups. Now, what I mentioned earlier was that these groups all have their own blend modes. By default on a group, this is set to pass through. This means you're ignoring any blend mode for the group and you're just using whatever blend modes exist underneath. So for instance, if I take the entire Ninja group, I can set this over to something like multiply, and you see how we're kind of blending into the background. But if I said it's a pass-through, and then open the group up, we could, just as an example, take the sword and set the sword over to multiply. And now the sword is blending through, but everything else isn't. So the upper ninja area, we're just kind of passing right through. We're not worried about any sort of blend modes that it might have. And I'll talk more specifically about blend modes a little later on in their own specific video. So that's a quick rundown of grouping layers within Photoshop, and that will wrap things up for this video. Thanks a lot.